This episode of Finding Demo Surf Fishing is being brought to you by the Kids Can Fish Foundation. KidsCanFish.net's the website to take a look at, see all the cool things that they actually do and their mission and some of the past experiences that they've had. Lots of great things that they do. They take these kids out wherever they are and wherever their camps are, and they do cast net clinics, fishing clinics. What else we got here? They've done live demonstrations. All these things come together for these kids to learn. But at the end of it, too, these kids get to take all that gear home for free. It is for them to use forever. That's huge. And they do that through all the donations from you. Whether you go right from the website at kidscanfish.net and do it direct link there, or you buy the cast net from Promar Ahi, proceeds of that go back, or you go to one of the, you buy merch, all that goes back into the camp. Don't forget to get to go to the old Run Into the Bulls tournament, St. Simon's Island, Georgia in October. An excellent tournament. I will be there. I'm very excited to go again. That all comes together to help that thing all do these things for the kids. So kidscanfish.net, go take a look at it, support them. Great times right there. Hello, happy, wonderful people. Hope you're doing well wherever you are. And things got me, as I'm reading the chat, I got me all messed up there. I shouldn't have done that. I hope you're doing well wherever you are. Things are going well, very well for you. Fishing is definitely picked up. Spring was a good run from pretty much everywhere I've seen online. And we are moving into the summer fishing. And summer fishing in the surf is it's a different beast depending on where you live. Here in the panhandle of Florida, we start dealing with June grass, and, just nature's way of moving stuff around, hot water, fish start moving around. And this week, we're going international. We're going to the other side of the world. And this is going to encompass the northern hemisphere and the southern. There's a lot of range in this whole thing. So it's a father and son team, Justin and Julian, and we're going to bring them on the show. And Julian's going to tell us about all of his experience. And Justin has been learning from his dad the whole way, and lots of cool pieces there. So it's going to be a double tap, a lot of fun. So without further ado, gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having us.
So let's get ourselves oriented here. Justin, where in the world are you right now?
I am in Noosa on the eastern coast of Australia. So if anyone doesn't know where Noosa is, it's in Queensland. Tropical, beautiful destination.
Down there. Had a great episode out of your neck of the woods there. Absolutely loved that. That was a lot of fun talking to them. Made me really want to get down there.
There's a lot of good fishing over here. There's a lot good fishing off the side, off the boat, in the rivers. Definitely no shortage.
Yeah, go fishing Australia really made me realize how unfamiliar I am with the territory. When he started talking about going up into the Northern Territory, he's like, yeah, that's where crocs live. I was like, oh, the map makes it look really good. I don't want to go there now. But yeah, y'all have some interesting zones. That's pretty cool fishing there.
Yeah, I think we're at the sweet spot. We're maybe about 3 hours south of where the crocs are. So we've got the warm water. We don't have the irukandjis, the deadly jellyfish. We don't have the crocs, but we've got the warm water and the clean water. We've got a wide variety of different pelagics and domicile species. So yeah, there's quite a lot of good in this part of the world. Definitely really happy to be here.
Well, I look forward to seeing some of your stuff later, especially some of the barramundi that I know you'll get your hands on, because it's always fun seeing the different fish species y'all pull up. You got some big monsters. And Julian, where are you today?
Well, Brian, today I'm in Switzerland. I actually immigrated from South Africa recently, and now living in Switzerland in the southeast, just on the border with Italy, up in the Alps. And we're actually quite high up. We're sitting at 1,800 meters above sea level. And my main focus here during the summer is to fish for trout. I'm mainly walking up around about 1,000 meters in altitude up from where we are and fishing the very, very clean mountain lakes, fly fishing, mainly fly fishing, but a bit of bait fishing. And but my original fishing experience really comes out of South Africa, where I was living for most of my life. And so today's talk will be mainly about my experiences in South Africa, which is my first love, which is surf fishing in the South African surf. So yeah, and particularly with a reference to competition fishing, which I think is one of the more important facets of my fishing career over the years.
Um, yeah, this is going to be good, everybody. I hope you're ready for it. And I thankfully, it's kind of weird. I've had episodes out of Australia, and I've had two episodes out of Australia and one episode out of South Africa. So I'm not wonderfully familiar, but I've had a very small overview of both countries, and I gotta say they are both on my list to definitely go fish sometime. So let's go ahead and start this. Let's wind it all the way back for you here, Julian. Tell us your story and what got you into fishing.
Brian, yeah, I really only started fishing competitively at quite a late age. Obviously, as a child, I used to fish in the dams and the lakes around, in South Africa, but mainly for very small fish, like any young kid who's wanting to start up his fishing career. And then sort of dibbled and dabbled until I moved to a little village up in the north coast of South Africa, north of Durban, a place called Mtunzini. And there I met up with a very old friend of mine from school days who got me into competitive angling. So at that stage, I was 30. And that was when I really started getting involved in the competitive side. And I've often said to people that the competitive side is what got me fishing as hard as what I do. I think without the competition, I might never have got to the levels that I have got to. And I just found the excitement of competing pushed me, pushed my limits and pushed me to go further and further into working out what, why, how, when, which I think is very important when it comes particularly to surf fishing. Without those questions being answered, there's just actually no hope for most people. They just dibble and dabble and they hope for the best, and people depend too much on luck. And yeah, competitive angling is what turns me on.
So when you say competitive, could you break that down a little bit more? What do you mean by competitive fishing?
Well, South Africa and also Namibia are very big in rock and surf competitive angling, and in my knowledge are the two countries that currently really get involved in our type of angling. So what we do is South Africa and Namibia are divided up into a whole lot of clubs based through provinces. So in South Africa, we've got 12 different provinces, and those 12 different provinces have clubs. Typically, each province will have between 8 and 12 clubs. And within those provinces, they will fish competition club on club. From there, they'll select a provincial side, and they will then go and fish at an interprovincial where all the provinces compete against each other. And from there, they select a national side, which gives you your national colors. So in South Africa, you would be getting Protea colors for that. And then they would then go and compete against another country. At this stage, that other country is basically Namibia, who would then, there would be a tournament, which is either based in Namibia or in South Africa. We'd love to see more countries get involved, but they're not organized at this stage. So countries like Australia, which have got some pretty decent anglers, they're not actually organized. They don't have a federation. They don't have a structure. And so consequently, they can't actually compete against us on a country level. So it's quite a different kind of setup, not something that most people see, but certainly our type of angling is very specialized. It's very different and very physical. And yeah, it's what I really love. It's what I enjoy.
Hey, Dad, why don't you break down how the competitions work? And when you say it's physical, like maybe about like how people are walking along the beaches and like the demarcation zones, like the length of the competitions, the fact that some of them start at like 2 a.m. It's pretty,
Yeah, by all means.
it's pretty extreme, and regardless of weather. But
Yeah,
you'll know
well,
better.
yeah, thanks, Justin. Yeah, typically a competition will be set within a boundary. So you'll based on where you're fishing, they'll set up a boundary. Boundary is normally around about 8 kilometers, and you all get a start time. So that all the clubs come to one destination. They have a roll call to ensure that everyone's there, and then they will decide the start time is for example, be 6 o'clock in the morning, and you would fish an 8-hour day, so that would be 6 until 2.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's not my strongest subject. 6 until 2,
Same.
and we would all start at 6. You'd walk onto the beach. There's no driving permitted on South African beaches, so you literally have to walk that 8-kilometer zone with all your tackle. So we have little trolleys that we pull behind us. Your bait is in there, your rods, your reels, your tackle, and we would walk down that beach, find a place to fish, and each as an individual would pick his own spot, and then we proceed to fish it. Obviously, there's a tidal difference in that 8 hours, so you'll have either a full outgoing or a full incoming tide. And depending on where you stop, you might find that in order to be able to get into the deeper water, you would have to wade. So typically, we would sometimes wade anything up to 100 meters out to sea through the surf, sometimes swimming, sometimes getting washed out to sea. It happens. And then once you're out there, you'll stand outside on the sandbank, which is maybe way steep, getting smashed by waves, and then throw a bait over the back, stand, wait for the pull, and fight the fish out. The fish that we target is based on weight. So your points are scored according to the amount of kilograms that you land. For fish that have got teeth like sharks and that, you would get 1 point per kilogram. And for fish that are edible fish, so your bony fish as we would know them, like your jewfish and what we would call cob, would get 2 points per kilogram. And at the end of the day, you add your points up, and the team with the most points wins, the individual with the most points wins, and so on. The big thing, of course, is that because it's based on weight, sharks are obviously bigger. So there's a big emphasis on targeting sharks, particularly if conditions are correct. So yeah, the fish are big. We're regularly landing fish in excess of 150 kilos, sometimes 250 kilo fish off the side. There are limitations on the tackle that we use. So the line class is not allowed to be more than 50 pound, which is about 22 kg. So we're landing fish over 200 kilos on 22 kilo line, standing on the beach. So yeah, it's very challenging, very, very challenging, and a full day of fishing, you're pretty exhausted at the end of it.
Yeah, I'd say so. I like the add in there, the requirement of the line. I mean, you talk about separating the men from the boys in that kind of group there. Because can you land a big ass shark on 50 pound? Yes, you can. You have to be drag manipulating. You have to be planning. You have to do all these things the proper way. There's a lot that goes into that. So that's an interesting add to creating into the competition. And I can kind of see where you probably run into some issues as the international one goes to playing that one out. And it's an 8K. As I'm laughing because I'm like, yeah, I know how far that is, unfortunately. Because we don't do K here in the US. People are like, what are kilometers? just remember, everybody, a 5K is 3.1 miles. It's the easiest way to keep things out, So there you go.
It's 5
3,
miles,
4,
isn't it?
5 miles essentially of
Yep.
beach that you get to walk, and then walking out 300 yards. I mean, 100 meters or 300 feet. Oh man, the math on that, not, it's way too early. I haven't had enough coffee. But I mean, the idea of being that far out, swimming it and pushing it, that's pretty extreme. And then the winning, I guess we didn't get to that part when you're talking about these competitions with the winning. What are the winnings that normally come from these competitions?
We're very special. We don't win anything. We only win the bragging rights. Is pretty much it. We don't do any kind of money prizes or anything like that, because what we found is that the moment you start giving out big prizes, people tend to cheat. And
Say it ain't so.
So we stay away from it. Also, what I might add is, what is interesting for us is we were the first country in the world to start doing our scoring based on measurement rather than on weighing fish. So we don't carry scales. We have tables which have been worked out by our Oceanographic Research Institute in South Africa. And for example, if you catch a blackfin shark, you put it down on the beach, you measure it from the nose to the caudal notch on the tail, and then you enter that measurement into an app, and it pops out a weight, and we use that. So consequently, we have very little trauma on our fish, and we get them back into the water very quickly after catching. And the competitions are such that we actually do not permit any fish to be removed, to be killed and taken out the water. So even if you catch something that you can eat, it still has to go back during competition. And that way we sort of try and stay above the critics that say we're killing everything. But yeah, we're very conscious of our stocks.
And then, Dad, the other thing is there's no gaffs allowed in competition, are there? You lose points, or you're not allowed to at all?
No gaffs permitted at all. So those big fish have to be landed without a gaff.
With hands.
With hands. You literally grab it by the tail and pull it out.
I don't know. Maybe I'm weird. We don't do gaffs here either. When it comes to the beach, you got to bring it up on the sand.
That's right.
The idea of walking out in the water with a gaff and a big fish, to me, is you're asking to get gaffed yourself. There's certain things in life in the surf that I think are safety in that one. I mean, you get a wave the wrong way, you get into the undertow on the rip the wrong way, you're going for a ride, and it's the worst ride of your life that you're fighting for, because the ocean, she's an unforgiving mistress. She will remind you that she owns you. So yeah, she's I don't mess around when it comes to that, and I haven't met too many surf anglers that do. They get worried. So when you were talking about swimming out, I was like, wow, that's bold. Because that's a lot of fight right there with that much line and the gear, and one arm out of the game is that's kind of a big piece. Let's add in another piece when it comes to these, because I know you can stack it up when you're starting to talk about these tournaments, because this will all probably match more than like what you normally do with your fishing, since you got into it the way you have. How do you plan your fishing trips?
Well, there's a whole lot of things that one has to look at before you go fishing. And I keep saying this to people that I speak to, and guys that are wanting to get into the sport. Probably the most important thing that you have to understand is that if you're not targeting a species, you're actually wasting your time. So when I say that, there's a whole lot of things that one has to take into account in order to decide which fish species to target. So for example, if it's the middle of summer, right? And I'm talking now in South Africa, for example. So if you're in the middle of summer, let's say February is the hottest time of the year, and there's generally the water is a little bit brown because of the rivers, because we have our rainy season that time of the year. And I know that in my part of the world, we're going to start catching a lot of what we would know flatfish, so skates, rays, big rays. Then you would, as a person going into a competition, you would be looking at the weather, and you would be looking firstly at the weather, at the wind direction. And if you're getting a northeasterly wind for a couple of days, then you know the water temperature is going to be down a bit, which is good for those particular species. Then you would then decide, well, I'm going to target those rays. Then I need to know which beach do they normally come on. So from experience, I know that I'd go to a certain beach. Then I would know that at certain times of the day they feed better than at others. And then based on the tide, can I fish that beach? Can I wade it? Can I get into the deeper water? So there's a whole lot of questions that need to be answered before you can even decide what you're going to do. So to answer your question briefly, one looks at the weather, one looks at the time of the year, one looks at the type of species that you're going to get in the area, and then you would make sure that you've got the right bait, that you've got the right tackle with you, that the traces are tied correctly, and then you would pick your water and you would go and fish it. And 9 times out of 10, you catch what you target. So Justin might remember when I was in Australia, now this last month, we were there for a month, and we went down to a beach south of Justin, and I wanted to catch a jewfish. It's something I wanted to do while I was there. I know that a jewfish is very similar to what we would call a cob in South Africa. So I believe they eat very similar. So we went to the beach, picked the water, went out, threw into the water, and caught two jewfish, 2 nice fish in like 3 throws. So
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's how it works.
Clinical.
It's very clinical.
I mean, this is kind of an international thing. I think it's fishing in general. You know, you're either targeting or you're fishing. And fishing is more of a, I'm just sitting there after a long work week and I'm just throwing a line in the water and I'm kind of just, I'm unplugging from the world. But when you're out there fishing, like you're targeting, you're dialed in. You know what you want. You know how you're going to do it. You know the things are. So the homework plays a huge factor into getting into that. And you just,
100%.
I mean, you slammed it there by going out. You know, you went to go visit Justin in Australia. All right, this is what I want. This is what we're doing. You knew what you needed, Justin. I'm sure you had the intel from that stuff of, hey, I think we're going to be in this position, and you went and crushed it. So
yeah, he went and crushed it, and now I need to catch a jewfish because I've not caught one since I moved to Australia 5 years ago.
Oh no,
that's now my goal. So I've actually been targeting them the last few days. I haven't had any luck, but I'll. My dad he pointed out a couple spots, so I'll keep working those. Eventually, the conditions will transpire, and one will jump on the end. But it is a challenge though, because like you say, you have those days where you've got like a seek and strike mission. You really plan it. You go and you're going to target a species. But then there's many other days where you just want to fish. You just want to escape the world, and yeah, I guess it's trying to understand how to make the most from those those ad hoc, those random fishing trips that you get to go on. How to target species on those ones when it's not as pre-planned.
Definitely on that. Well, it's been 20 minutes here, so let's knock into a quick bait check because we've only begun starting scratching the surface here. We got some really interesting things to continue with. It's been 20 minutes, so hopefully that means you've caught a bunch of fish while you're listening to this episode. Yeah, so that's what we do. If you haven't yet, check your bait. Make sure it's still good. It might be a time for a refresh. You guys know I love using crab knuckles. It's one of my favorites for the pompano, that's for sure. This is the time when I probably pop it off, pop a new one on. That meat's probably been chewed up by something. This bait check is being brought to you by the guy that taught me how to use crab knuckles, the Sinker Guy. Head on over to thesinkerguy.com and take a look at everything that Chip's got going on in the Sinker Guy garage. You need sinkers? He's got them in your name, or got it in his name. It's all the Sputniks. Different weight ranges from different sizes. They work great. Absolutely love Sputniks. Got plenty to talk about when it comes to that. Got a whole article on why I use Sputniks back on findingdemosurffishing.com. And if you need rigs, he's got the Bruno rig, the Uno rig, great pieces of gear right there. If you need supporting equipment, scissors, beads, floats, maybe you need a hooking tool. Yeah, that's pretty cool when it's coming to build rigs. He's got it in there. So go over to thesinkerguy.com, take a look, get your order in today. So you mentioned this piece, and this is, I think, the next great part of it. You mean, Julian, you went down to Australia and you had a little research and you picked your spot and then boom, nailed it. So let's talk about spots. How do you select your spot for fishing?
It's quite a broad question. That it's not that simple. And once again, you pick your spot based on what you want to catch. It's as simple as that. So it'll depend also on where you are in the world at the time. So, and what do you want to catch? And yeah, it's what do you want to catch? That's the first question. So I'll tell you a story while we're at it. There was a very good friend of mine, chap by the name of Nigel Simmons, that Justin knows.
Hmm.
Him and I used to fish together a lot in tournaments, and he was walking up the beach at his local beach at a place called Zinkwazi a few years back, and there was obviously an upcountry tourist that was coming down the beach on the other way, and as they passed each other, the tourist stopped Nigel and asked him and said to Nigel, "Are you local here?" And Nigel answered, "Yes, no, we're local here." So he said, "Do you fish?" And Nigel said, "Yeah, I do. I fish a lot." So the guy said, "Well, where's the best places to fish?" So Nigel turned around and said, "Well, what do you want to catch?" And the guy said, "Well, anything." So Nigel said to him, "Well, then just fish anywhere." And I think that pretty much sums it up. Because if you don't know what you're targeting, then you can't pick your water. So, your question is as simple as that to answer. So if you were to say to me to catch a tailor or a shad, as we would call it in South Africa, where would you go? Yeah, I can tell you the kind of water that I would go into. In South Africa, I would look for a north-facing bay. I would look for a southwesterly wind. I'd look for a bit of chop on the water. That kind of water would be what I'd be searching for. And
Decent sized
that's
surf.
where I would target.
Yep.
Yeah.
The white water.
And you would fish in white water. I think that's also a fallacy that a lot of people, they think that, the deep blue water is the place to go and fish. Not at all. It can be if you want to catch sharks, but if you want to catch edible fish, you fish in the white water. And just beginning to learn that is a big step forward in the right direction.
Yeah, I think a lot of anglers forget that the first 50 yards or the first piece is overlooked because it's easy to get, you grab that 12, 13-foot rod and you think, all right, I got to heave it out there. And it's easy to want to cast out, 100 yards, 100 meters, give it full power to do all that. But in reality, a lot of it, they just hide right in front of us. And it's easy to just overlook it. I make that mistake all the time. I never thought I would, but I do constantly. And I get schooled up by my daughter because she doesn't cast as far. And, her lines are going off. Like, what the hell am I doing here? Why am I even fishing? But yeah, the whitewater is an easy one to overlook. And thank you for adding in that other part too. It depends on the species, because I think that it's easy to say, all right, I want to catch this. And then you're using the wrong bait. You're using the wrong lures. You're using the wrong setup. You don't need to be in a rip current. You need to actually be in a deep pocket or something of that nature. It's easy to overlook that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, we talk about white water, but what we also need to remember is that the white water is not only on the side. So there is white water out the back as well. So you'll get a shallow sandbank, which is pretty much isolated with gutters running left and right of it. And those are prime spots for catching fish. But a lot of times they're quite far out. So that's where the casting is really important, to be able to, first of all, wade as far as you possibly can to get the distance, to be able to land your bait on those zones. And the other thing that I often mention to people is that if you take into account the direction of the current and you've got a sandbank working on the back, so when I refer to a sandbank, it might be a patch of white water, might be 100 meters out from the side, and you've got a current running, for example, running from left to right across the sandbank. The first place you're going to put your bait is going to be on the right-hand side of the sandbank, because the current is obviously feeding any organisms, bait organisms that are being crashed out of the sand by the breaking waves are going to be washed off on the right-hand side. And fish always feed into the current. So typically you would go, and first throw would always be on the right-hand side if you've got a current from left to right. If your current running the other way, then you would fish on the other side of that bank. So it's those small things that make the difference between catching and
Fishing.
standing. Yeah, and fishing.
And there was another one. You wrote a good piece about sandbanks, and not only the left and right, but also the back versus the inshore side. So the inshore side where the waves wash the nutrients, off the inshore side of the bank, and the fish feeding on that side as well. Is that also a consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if the waves are, or if you've got a pushing tide, for example, the waves are breaking, pushing that food stuff off the front of the bank rather than off the back of the bank. So the fish will be feeding in the gutter on the front of the bank. You'll also find that early morning, your fish will be inside those gutters, because in the dark, they're not scared to come in close. And the bait fish are often right inside the gutters. So you want to be closer rather than further. So it's all about thinking, like, how would a fish think? You've got to think about it. So if I was a fish, where would I be looking? If I'm a shark, what do I eat? If I'm a jewfish, where do I go to? Where do I find the mullet that I want to eat? And then you plan your life around that. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it. People tend to stereotype the fisherman as the guy, as you say, who just wants to sit on the beach with a line in the water and a beer in his hand. But a true angler, as I would call it, as an angler, is none of that. He's a person who thinks, who's very fit, who puts in the effort, and puts in a lot of hours trying to work out all these things, because there's no book that can tell you. There's no one. I can't tell people how it's going to be. It's something that you learn through experience. And I often say to people, I'll walk down the beach with someone. Let's say you and I walk down the beach, and as I'm walking, I'll say, "Oh, I love that water." And then you turn to me and you say, "What do you like about it?" And then I have to sit and think a bit, because why do I like it? The reason I like it is because over the last 40 years of fishing, that pattern has become ingrained in my mind. And when I see it, I subconsciously, I realize that it's good water. But once I sit and think about it, then I can explain to you what I'm seeing. But it's hours and hours and hours and hours of hard work.
Considering,
yeah. Isn't it weird how that happens? I cannot. Yeah, because I know I'm guilty of it. I'll be at the beach, I'm like, there's a rip, there's the bar, there's the gut. I'm gonna throw a line right there. I'm gonna throw another one there, and I'm gonna use my lure right there to target the toothy guy. All right, let's do this. And then you realize you don't have any of your gear, and you were just sitting there the entire time for a beach day with your wife. But I mean, those things happen. You mentioned this when it comes to different species, because you're not, like you said, yes, you target one, and you plan for it. So, if you're going after toothy critters, you have a certain setup. If you're going after, the ones that eat crustaceans, you got another one. So when it comes to rigging, that's a kind of a broad question here. So can you bring us down a little bit here of what your thoughts are of rigging for fishing for the, pelagic, predatory, and just kind of everyday fishing for eaters?
Yeah, for eaters, I mean, most of the eaters don't have teeth. So they do, some of them do. So Justin catches some of those funny things on his ski with lots of teeth on them. And obviously, if you're targeting those species and you're throwing, and typically you'll be throwing spoons, lures for that kind of thing. So you'd be like shad, tailor, as they call them, and barracuda. You'd be throwing lures, and you would have a little bit of steel, so that you don't get bitten off. So if you're throwing lures, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have some steel. If you're throwing baits, and we we as competitive anglers are probably 95% bait throwers. So if you're fishing for edible fish, most of them don't have teeth, so we would be throwing straight nylon for a trace. So your trace would be nylon. I tend to fish lighter rather than heavier. I find that the lighter I fish, the more pulls I get, and so typically my nylon trace would be about a 0.65, which is about 50 pound. Would be about a 50 pound trace, snoot as they would call it, and I fish only with circle hooks. It's something that we've started doing in South Africa now. You'll hardly see a J hook anymore in South Africa. Everyone fishes circles. It's less damaging on the fish. Catches them in the corner of the mouth and the scissors every time. And we find that we're not missing fish at all. Your sinker setup is basically linked to the type of rod you're using. So I'd normally be fishing with a 5 to 7 if I'm fishing a 5 to 7 ounce sinker if I'm fishing for edible fish. And then depending on the how strong the water is, I might use a wire sinker with, like an anchor sinker. We call it a grapnel. And otherwise, yeah, maybe a cone. But I very seldom fish with any other things besides a wire or a cone, purely because I prefer to throw my bait in the right spot and have it stay there than to throw it and then have it wandering around and hoping for the best. If I'm fishing in the reef, I also tend to fish with wire because it doesn't move and you don't get hooked up as much. All my main line, I only fish with braid line, so it's all braided line. The reason for that is obviously the diameter to breaking strength is much better, so you don't drift as much, you don't get messed around by the wind as much. It's a lot more sensitive, so you get a better feel. And the feel is not so much about getting the bite, but rather about knowing whether you've still got bait on the end. Because if you fish with nylon, many times the small fish take your bait off without you even knowing it. Whereas with braid, you always know if you've got a bait. And obviously you can throw further with braid. And the other thing is that nowadays with braid coming in, we find that the fixed spool reels come into their own again, whereas in the past we never ever fished with a fixed spool reel. We only fished with a revolving reel, with a spinning, what they call a pen reel, purely because of capacity. But now with the braid being much thinner, we can actually fish with a normal fixed spool reel, which has got a whole lot of advantages with regard to casting and other such things. So yeah, so that would be my basic setup. So it would just be nylon trace, hook size dependent on the bait size. So, if you're throwing a small bait, small hook, throwing a big bait, big hook. Snoot nylon, normally 6.5, 0.7, so it's about 50 pound. And then I don't use a running sinker at all. So I don't use a sliding shrivel like a lot of people will use a sliding shrivel. My theory is if a fish bites, it's only got a mouth. It doesn't have any arms and hands. So if it bites, the hook's in its mouth. You're going to hook it. You don't need to worry about it letting go. And yeah, and then the sinkers, I fish a lot with a grapnel sinker. And the fish tend to hook themselves, particularly with a circle hook. You get a bite, the fish is on already. No striking required.
Yeah. The grapple, so I think we're talking about the same thing. We're just two different words here. Your grapple is basically a lead piece with legs, essentially, right?
Exactly, yeah. But the legs break loose. So
yep.
Once they pull, they break loose, yeah.
Yep. So that's the same thing we use here, the Sputniks. And I, like I said, in that last bait check, that's all I use. It could be a non-current day and I'll still use a Sputnik. And the main thing I found was I did a casting day. I went out and took pyramid, cannonball sinker, arrowhead sinker, Sputnik sinker, I took a myriad and just took them out and launched them just to see what a difference made. And the Sputniks made a huge difference when it came to distance, accuracy, and hold. Because a 4-ounce Sinker, a 4-ounce Sputnik can hold like an 8-ounce pyramid. The legs keep it there, and you can adjust the width. You can go 90 degrees out, and it's going to hold even more. The breakaway is going to be a little bit funky because it's a 90, but those are huge. So it's kind of cool to hear that you're using them over there. And I like that you added in with the snoods. So when you're talking about your snoods there, I see a certain rig in my head that we call the mortician. Chip from the Sinker guy showed me this one. So basically you've got a 50-pound main line with 2 knots in it, north and south, and then in between it you've got another external snood, whether it's 15, 20, 15 pound in between, that you just put a loop knot in the back, and then you just feed it through and go there. Are you talking something of that nature as your snood, or are you talking more as like a single drop or a double drop where it's all continuous on one line?
There's so many different theories, lots and lots and lots. So quite often, if I'm fishing for cob, a lot of the edibles, I'll fish with 2 hooks. So what we would call it a Christmas tree trace. So essentially, we work with a shrivel, and then a shrivel down. You can either use knots or you can use a shrivel, and then you would tie one hook at say about a meter above the sinker, right? So the sinker would be right at the bottom. So the one hook would be about a meter above, and the second hook would be about half a meter above. So they'd be separated by about half a meter. So your whole trace would be about 1.5 meters, with your so-called Sputnik at the end. And we would normally use a smaller hook on the top and a bigger hook on the bottom. And we would use, say, a squid bait on the top and say a sardine bait on the bottom, and throw it like that into the white water. So you're covering 2 different baits. Also, the sardine puts out a lot of smell, so it tends to attract smaller fish, and then the other fish come with it, might grab the top hook. Some of the fish like to feed a little bit higher up, so it's nice to have a second hook up top. But generally, for distance, I'll fish only 1 hook. My snoot would be around about 700 millimeters. So what's that about? No, not even 700, 500. Be about 1.5 foot, maybe 2 foot, the snoot, hook snoot. And I think a snoot would be a little bit longer. I never fish with a sinker snoot shorter than the hook snoot. A lot of people do. They seem to believe that it keeps the bait on the ground or what, I don't know. But my experience is that your bait needs to be off the ground in most cases. If you've ever sat in a fish tank and taken a piece of bait on a piece of string and put it into a fish tank, put it on the bottom, the fish will swim around and ignore it. The moment you lift it, they'll go for it. So we sometimes actually even put foam inside our baits. We put polystyrene inside the baits to lift them, to make them more visible, but give them more action. They move it better in the water. And our baits are all tied to look like something. They're not just blobs. We actually spend a lot of time making sure the bait is aerodynamic, firstly for throwing, and secondly for lying in the water, that it doesn't twist and it doesn't tangle. So there's smaller things that we play around with. But yeah, so the snoots are obviously, if you're fishing for sharks, then the snoots are, they can be anything up to 2.5 meters. What's that? Nearly 8 foot long, with full steel, 150 pound, 200 pound steel, and we'll fish for like that. So yeah, long traces.
It's interesting when you talk about the foam, though. One of the big things that I hear plenty of anglers talk about is, we use it here. Sorry, I was looking to see if I actually had a rig in here, but I don't right now. Floats on the end of, you get the snood, float, then your hook, and you're hoping that brings you up. And it's a big problem I see is people forget that buoyancy plays a different game. You can't put a certain You can't put a certain piece of bait on a foam that's not designed to hold that much weight. It doesn't work. It's going to sit on the bottom and it's just going to be useless. But I like that you were adding in there that adding the foam to your bait itself, because I mean, you're using the sardines, you're using different pieces of fish, adding that in to create buoyancy to get it off the ground and on a longer snood, which is even more of a, oh, okay, I could see that one working, especially to get different columns, because you're not playing the bottom column, you're playing bottom, middle, up, because you've only got a certain amount of water to fish. The setup that you have with that, I guess my question really comes down to is, when you talk about putting the foam with your bait, are you wrapping it with a string set, or is it kind of an ingestion? How do you normally play that?
Well, so what you would do, the easiest way to explain it would be on a J hook, because baiting up circle hooks is another game altogether. So I'm not going to even go there, because for someone who's never worked with circle hooks, they wouldn't understand what we're talking about. But on a J hook, we would take a piece of foam, we would cut it to like an elongated egg, that sort of shape. Then we would tie that onto the shank of the hook on the back. So you've now got all right. So that would be tied on with elastic cotton, and once that's tied on, then we might take a piece of squid and then wrap it around that piece of foam, and we might give it some tails, so that by the time you've finished, you've got a hook with some tails hanging below it, and a body made out of foam with squid wrapped around it. So at the end of the day, you've got a little fish, for want of a better description. And when you throw that, we would typically clip our sinker onto the hook itself. It would have like a little hook on it, and we would throw the whole lot together. So it throws, you get an extra 20, 30 meters in distance out of that, so that it's not swinging around in the air. And then once it lands, it obviously breaks away, and then the foam then floats that bait up and keeps it in the mid column. There are lots of different ways. I've got other ways where I can actually fish. I can fish 9 meters off the bottom with different rigs. But yeah, there's so many different ideas and things that, you've just got to try. If you sit, you know what it's like. You're sitting having a beer, talking nonsense with a friend, and he says, "Oh, I wonder what would happen if we did this." And then you try it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So
Learning off the old changing things up with solving all the world's problems over a beer at the beach. Who knew it would be so effective?
Well, you see when you compete, and this is why I'll bring it back to the competition side of things. When you compete, you're always seeking the competitive edge. So you've got to come up with new ideas all the time to stay ahead of the mob. And that's what we do.
Definitely.
Lots of tricks.
I can see that for sure. It's been 40. We're almost about. Yeah, we're overdue. I'm due for another bait check here, but we're going back into the competition here because you said something that really rung me, and we're gonna play into that here right after this. It is the second paycheck of the episode. Hopefully everything's been so good for you. You're just listening to this in the car on the way home. Yeah, because that's what we want. This paycheck is being brought to you by Ninja Tackle, ninjatackleva.com. Great place to go if you're looking for my absolute favorite rods that I utilize, the Ninja Dagger series. 7-footers all the way up to 13.3. This thing, it's a great set of rods for all sorts of great fishing. You want to do freshwater, saltwater? If you're 7-footer, will do a lot of things. My favorite, one of the greats, 8.6, throwing metal off the beach, 2 ounces all day. It loves to eat it up, and it'll go even lower than that. That 12-footer, I use those for fun and excitement. And the 13, I haven't thrown it yet, but everyone that's thrown one said it's great. Absolute great product. You need reels, rigs, he's got them all in there, different pieces. And it's not just for Florida or Virginia or any of that. It's an international great use. And if you're into the firearms and firearm accessories, Ninja Tactical. Yep, he's got you covered there for optics and other parts. That's best I can say it on here without getting a warning from the other matters of internet. So ninjatackleva.com. Go take a look today. Get your order in. Good stuff. Okay, so we're talking about competition here, and you're talking about rigs and the setups and competitive edge. And I think one piece of the one piece that we didn't talk about, and it's easy to not say this, is different world or different places, different beaches, different countries have different depths. You got high impact beaches here, low impact beaches. You got long beaches out of Texas is one of the ones I love talking about because guys got to walk 200 yards off the beach just to get an extra 3 feet of water. The depth
Wow.
differential makes a huge difference. And Justin, you can throw into this. I mean, with your beaches in Australia, Julian, versus the South African beaches, depth from the shore makes I mean, it is noticeable difference.
I think my experience of being like I said, I've been in Australia for 5 years now, and the beaches are actually, I'd say, quite similar, like remarkably, wonderfully similar to the ones in South Africa.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's actually really good, and we've got a lot of the same sorts of gutters and channel structures. Um, I'm yet to see as many really deep water points like the ones that we've seen in South Africa. But off the beach, yeah, it's not that hard to sort of get to like 3 meters of water up to 5 meters of water. So yeah, it's actually it's pretty nice. I can't say that I do as much wading as my dad does. I'll get there. It's still pretty early in my rock and surf fishing career, I'd say. But yeah, yeah. Dad, what about you? What did you think of Australia versus South Africa? Was it what I said correct or accurate?
Yeah, I mean, where we fished, absolutely, it was very similar. But then bear in mind that that the latitude that we were fishing at in Australia is very similar to the latitude where we used to live. But Australia is a huge country, and I think that once you start going north and you start getting into the zone where where the barrier reef is and everything, it'll be a totally different kettle of fish. In fact, I would be surprised if you could do much more than do spinning up there. I don't think that you would be it wouldn't be possible to bait fish that easily because you'd be in very shallow water forever, my guess. And I have been up to the barrier reef, so I've got a rough idea what it looks like. And I think as you go further south, obviously, the water gets more like Cape Town water. It gets a bit colder. It might get flatter. It's so much, so much that can change from just, just over a distance of 50 kilometers. So I think it's very difficult to try and compare the two places. I think what you've got to do is you've got to look at the species again, and I come back to this every time, and you've got to say what species in Australia are going to be similar to the species in South Africa, and will they feed the same way? Yes, they probably will. And so just as an example, we catch a very nice eating fish in South Africa called a stump nose. And while I was fishing for they also live in white water and churning white water. And while I was fishing for the jewfish, I also caught a stump nose, which looked surprisingly like our stump nose. And I don't even know what it was called. It's probably got some funny Australian name. But the point is that, the fish all evolved in these different parts of the world, and genetically they're slightly different, but physically they're very similar, and they eat similar things, and they operate in similar water, which is why they've evolved into those particular shapes. And so I think it doesn't really matter where you go in the world. I think that you're going to find similar species in similar latitudes. And I use latitudes rather than water types, because I think latitude is what determines water temperature in a lot of cases. Not only latitude, but also, are you on the east coast or on the west coast? So in South Africa, our west coast is cold water, our east coast is warm water. In Australia, your west coast is cold water, your east coast is warm water. In America, I think the same thing. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I've never fished in America, so I'm guessing now.
You're pretty good there. The west coast of the United States is definitely, the Pacific Ocean is definitely chillier. In certain zones, whereas the Atlantic, you're going to play a little bit warmer, especially like my area is the Gulf of Mexico. It will routinely hit I'm going to say in Fahrenheit because I can't do centigrade. I suck at that. But our normal running in the summer, it is not uncommon to hit 87 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very weird.
Sounds warm.
it's
sounds
bath water strange. It's like, why is it this? You go into the water to cool off and you're not cooling off. It's pretty depressing. Whereas when I was out in California, when I was stationed out there, you get into the water like, oh, there's some shrinkage, and it's not expected in June. It can be that way. But I love that you brought up latitude. I never really thought of latitudes of that nature because for us, you can play a different game. But I mean, you on the same one for us. What I have in the Atlantic Ocean versus the Pacific Ocean on our side is you got different species. Some of them are kind of same. You got some similarities, sure. Perch and that sort of thing, you can run into different ones or close twos, but you're not catching a pompano like a Florida pompano off the coast of California. They just don't migrate that way.
Mm-hmm.
But what the differential being, like you said, Northern Australia versus Southern Australia, huge differential there in that distance alone. Because people look at a map, they're like, oh, Australia's not that big. Australia's friggin' huge.
Yeah, 100%.
The map does not give that country enough credit for how big it is.
The state that I live in is the size of South Africa. Just the state of Queensland is the size of South Africa. It's crazy.
Yeah, so your differential pieces with that makes difference. Huge points there. What I didn't expect, and I think I'm glad you brought that up. Our beaches, mine, you'd be hard pressed. Let's see here. How far out of that? Probably 200, 300 meters. You'd be lucky to hit, what's a meter? 3 feet, 3, 6, 9. You'd be lucky to hit 4 meters of depth within 200, the 300 yards. You'd be lucky to get that far. The majority of the water as it runs, I'm 6, so that's 3, 6, 2 meters. 1.5 meters of water is very common for us. So we don't have that big cut. But if I go up to Massachusetts, up to New England, up to the Cape, I could end up hitting 20 meters of water. If I walked out a little bit further, the quick drop off is a differential piece. And I think as an angler, you said it best with that, is knowing what you're going to target and what that makes a difference of how you can fish. I can't throw a single dropper with a piece of fish bites here with like that and be like, oh, I'm going to catch this species the exact same way I would do it in Massachusetts. There's no way. I'm not going to catch a striped bass that way. I have to do it a certain piece. So knowing your depth, knowing your fish, knowing what you're doing, like you said, with different pieces, makes the huge difference. It's all in the end there.
Yep.
We fished a spot.
I wasn't supposed to. Go ahead.
we fished a spot recently that it dropped off from the edge right down to like 20 meters, and that was when my dad was over here in Australia. And we watched how some of the local guys were doing it. They were fishing with balloons and live herring and just drifting them out. And we caught quite a lot of longtail tuna, up to like 30 kgs or something, right off the side there. So we've got a bit of a mix of spots here where we've got these like big drop offs, but then also those long flat beaches.
Balloon fishing is a fun one to watch, isn't it? It's like, how did you just drift that bait? I mean, it's a long wait, but getting that bait out there like that, it's so smart. I mean, I would have loved to have been around the person that thought, oh, I'm going to put a balloon on this line. And I'm going to take it out there for half a mile and I'm going to make it work. It's just genius.
I think the most surprising thing about that was how fast the drop off was. So the drop off was literally like fishing on a cliff. The tuna actually bit. They took those baits within 20 meters of the side.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't throw it far. You cannot throw it far. And the wind wasn't offshore. So it wasn't like it was blowing the balloon out. The balloon was merely there to keep the bait on the surface because the tuna, they seem to like it there. And they came in so close, it was ridiculous. obviously just like that deep water. And obviously, we were catching the herring with little lures right where we were fishing. So they were coming in to feed on those, and all we had to do was throw on the outside of that little shoal and they would eat it. So yeah, it's amazing.
That column makes a difference, man. I mean, just different water columns produce so many different things. It's, like space age movies, cars are driving at different altitudes. Yes, they don't get it. Same with the fish. They're all going to travel at different speeds, different altitudes, depths and all that. It's fun.
I've worked out a new plan for the next trip. So
Oh.
I think next time we're going to do even better. I said to Justin, I've got some good ideas. So we don't need balloons.
Yeah.
And we're going to catch a lot of fish.
I'm looking forward to that. We already had too many fish. Our eskies our freezers were completely full with tuna.
Oh no, not that. Anything but that.
Yeah.
No.
Someone take it away from me.
That's a good problem to have. So with competition, you've nailed into a lot of pieces, and I've really enjoyed it. And I love how you tied it all together. How competition has really changed your way of view of fishing. I can kind of hear through the story there. I know I'm using my words, not yours on that, but how you've connected the pieces for that to be successful. I mean, like you said, you went down to go see Justin in another country, different from where it is, same latitude if you play into that, but you were still successful based on what you've learned from previous, and you've put it all together to make it work. And that says a lot about what you've learned and how to use it. So well done, sir. Very well done.
Thank you. Yeah.
We'll get into the closing pieces here, actually. But one of the ones that I didn't ask you earlier was, what are some top surfing mistakes to avoid that you've learned, and how can anglers continuously improve the skills and their knowledge to create success?
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes that the fisherman makes, and I'm going to refer to him as the fisherman, I think it's the biggest mistake that I see, is the fallacy that you have to fish in the deep blue. They look at the water, and if it's deep and it's blue, then you throw bait in it and you hope for the best. And I think anyone who's been even slightly successful in fishing knows that that's not what it's about. It's not about throwing in the deep blue. It's about fishing in the white water. So I think that if that's one message I can take across, that would be one of the things. The second one, I think that a lot of people mess up quite badly on is their tackle, particularly their knots. People don't take time to learn the correct knots, and often you'll see a guy fighting a fish for 10, 15 minutes and suddenly nothing. And when he reels out, his leader is gone because the leader knot didn't work. The other third one is buying cheap tackle, particularly hooks that can break. Number one, they can open. Number two, or number three, they're not sharp. Sharp hooks, if there's anything that I can tell someone, is to make sure their hooks are sharp. If there's the slightest little bend in the tip of the hook because it bumped a rock or whatever, just discard that hook. Don't use it, because you will lose fish. When in the old days, when we used to, before they started chemically sharpening hooks, we all used to carry a file, and we used to file our hooks to an absolute needle point, and it makes a difference. It makes 20 to 30% difference on your hookup rate. So yeah, those are the three things I would look at. It would be knots, water selection, and your hooks. Make sure that they've got points on them.
Dad, you said something really good in Australia. How people win competitions. It's by the fish that they lose, not by the fish that they catch.
100%.
Something like that. Yeah, because of those blunt hooks, the cheap tackle, and like blunt hooks and cheap tackle specifically.
Yeah, I think Justin, the one thing that I recall particularly with yourself. Now, when you started your paddle ski fishing, you were complaining that you were getting a lot of pulls, but you weren't hooking the fish.
Yeah.
And
Six
I
in
asked
one
you,
day.
how tight is your drag?
Yeah.
You said, oh no, I keep it very loose, because then I don't want to spook the fish. I said, tighten your drag.
Yeah.
The moment you tighten your drag, your hookup changed. And the
100%.
hookup changed because there's more resistance, number one, which helps to sink the hook. But also, it works the same way with the sharpening of your hook. If your hook's not sharp, it doesn't penetrate, and you just miss too many fish. So it's worthwhile spending money on decent hooks. And I tend to stick to hooks that I trust, and I don't change. Whereas you'll find there's a lot of fashion in fishing. People will look to the top guys, or what should we call them, the fishing influencers, and they always want to be fishing with what that guy fishes with. And so if you keep changing your tackle, you've got to get used to it. Every time you change, you've got to get used to it. That hook, you've got to bait it up slightly differently. It might not, it's got a different gape, it's got all sorts of things that are different. And so I tend to stick to one type of hook, and that I stick with, and I learn to use it, and that's what I use. And it works for me.
Okay, now I'm going to ask, what kind of hook is it?
I use a tuna mustard, a mustard circle, and it's an offset, so it's slightly offset. So they call it a mustard tuna offset circle. That's what I use.
Yeah, I wish I could use that. Florida, we get slapped for using offsets. That's a big no for us. Offsets are
well, if you're using J hooks, offsets are a no because they're really bad, give you a bad hookup. But on a circle, no problem at all.
Yeah. That was a very unfortunate learning experience for me. Didn't realize the offset J hook was a no down here, and I was quickly educated. But they make a huge difference. We're going to continue on that because I know we're already an hour in and we got a little bit more time, but I want to do one more bait check so we don't have to do another one because you brought up something fun. I'm like super excited to get back into the conversation, but here we go. This bait check is being brought to you by DS Custom Tackle. DS Custom Tackle is out of the Delaware area, and they make excellent gear for you to build your own rigs, or they have rigs readily available for you, whether you're fishing for whiting, pompano, bluefish, squid, all those pieces, everything in between. If you want to get into making your own rigs and selling them online, DS Custom actually has an available program for you to get your hands on all that gear, so you can do that and reach out to them and talk about it. If you want to build into fun things, making your own rigs with night fishing, one of the things I love, the sculls, they glow in the dark. I have a whole thing about glowing dark fishing. I'm not going to get into that right now, but I will say it makes a little bit of a difference. So dscustomtackle.com, go take a look. You're going to find something, I guarantee it. So when you start talking about sharpness of hooks, my buddy Justin from Justin Reed Fishing, I fished with him all the time. I still do, and I love the guy. He showed me one thing. He used to take his circle hooks and he put it above his thumbnail and he'd run it across. If it didn't grab, it was gone. I never thought about it. I was like, oh, okay. And then I figured after we did a tournament, we were in a big tournament, and it was crush mode. We were just killing it, hitting every fish we could, and then all of a sudden it started slowly dissipating. And I figured it out is because I had a dull hook. I think one of the things people forget about when it comes to sharpening of hooks, and this is why I'm saying this for a question, is bait. You pick up your bait, you penetrate that hook, you cause something to it. It's like a needle. Every time you poke a needle into something, it gets a little duller. When you're doing all those ones and you're constantly rebaiting and all that, you're dulling the hook a little bit off the tip. What do you do now to keep yours sharp? Because like you said, they're chemically sharpened. Do you still do the filing? Do you do anything else?
No, no, we don't carry a file anymore. Firstly, a circle hook is virtually impossible to sharpen. It's really just purely because of the shape. It's really difficult to sharpen it. So if we were fishing a tournament, we would carry several traces. You wouldn't just use one trace. So you would just change your trace. Before the tournament, you'll have a trace wallet. In there, you'll have probably 5 or 6 of each type of trace that you might use on the day. and you just replace them as and when required. Because obviously, even with a nylon trace, if you're using it and you've caught 4 or 5 fish, you'll find that the nylons also tends to get all buckled and bent, and it doesn't hang properly anymore. So just cut the trace off, put a new one on, throw again. So your hooks stay sharp. It's not really a concern.
That's smart though. I'm glad you brought up the hook thing, because I think tackle is, it's different than when like Justin and I were kids. Yeah, tackle was kind of one of those things. Dad has his gear. Don't mess with dad's gear. It's that constant use. But now, and you can buy 20 hooks for, $10-15 and just run it from there. It's disposable. It quick and easy changes. So
Yeah.
I just think we've come a long way with technology on that. So I love that you're adding in with the piece, especially with the nylons. You can just switch it out. It doesn't hurt you. So let's move into some of the closing pieces here. You mentioned top surf fishing mistakes, but let's talk about a brand new angler. They're just getting into this. They're learning the hard way through the hard knock motion of trial and error. What is some knowledge you would give to a brand new angler to get a head start?
In South Africa, I know what I would tell the guy. I can't speak for your country, but certainly in South Africa, what I would tell the guy is join a club. That would be the first thing. You can't. There's no ways that you can learn as quickly on your own as you can if you're under the wing of someone who can teach you. So in South Africa, when I was still club fishing, which I still do a little bit, but I would take those youngsters under my wing. So they would join a club, and I would say, "You're now going to fish with me for the next 10 competitions. You're going to be my fishing partner," and you teach them. So that would be sort of like, yeah, that would be the best option. But certainly, if you can find someone who's got experience, who can actually teach you, you can't beat that. Otherwise, what I used to do when I first started fishing, and I'm talking now 40 years ago when I first started, and I really didn't know much about surf fishing at the time. What I did a lot of is I used to fish on my own a lot. And it sounds totally backwards now, because I'm saying on the one side that you should get someone to teach you, but on the other side, you also need to develop your own skills through experience. And by spending time on your own on the beach and trying different things without someone laughing at you makes a huge difference, because you learn what works and what doesn't work. And I would go, for example, when I was really competitive, I would go down to the beach on the worst conditions that I could think of, screaming southwesters, 3.5 meter swell, massive sidewash, and go and see if I can actually catch a fish in those conditions. And it's amazing what you can achieve if you go and work at it and you think about it, because sometimes you're going to be thrown in those situations and you need to know how to do it. So yeah, I think fishing on your own is a big thing. I think also being prepared to walk and look at the beach, work your way through it. Too many people will walk onto the beach and fish straight in front of the access point. I think it's worthwhile taking a good stroll on the beach and trying places where no one else has fished. Obviously, if you're in one spot and there's 10 people fishing there, then your chances of catching that one fish that's there is 1 in 10. If you walk down the beach and you're one there and there's one fish, then your chance of catching it is 100%. So, yeah, I think, yeah, spend time on your own and try and find someone to teach you.
Nice, good one, Justin. What about you? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say what I've learned, my humble experience is like learning to take control of the situation. And whether that's fishing off a kayak, whether that's spearfishing, whether that's fishing from the side, if you get to the beach and you throw a bait and after 20 minutes you're not getting any pulls, change something. If you're getting pulls and you're not hooking up, then maybe go to a smaller hook. change from squid to sardine, walk a bit, try and find another gutter, throw in closer, try throw further, but by no means just settle for failure. Put the work in. I would say, yeah. I found that that's really helped. Like I said, across all of those disciplines, like just taking control of the situation.
All right. I like it, guys. All right, Julian. I didn't ask this question earlier. I kind of held it off to the end, and I'm kind of glad I did. Can you share a memorable fishing story or moment, including some unexpected catches and wins?
Yeah, I actually looked at that. I had a few that I thought about. I'm not quite sure which one is the better one.
Go with them all. Give us a couple here, man. By all means, share the memories, because memories are some of the best stories.
I think one of the funnier ones. I was fishing a tournament down in Jeffreys Bay, which you might know from the surfing day. You know, it's a very famous surfing spot. And we were fishing there, and myself and a good friend of mine who was fishing for one of the opposition provinces, we waded out onto this very, very difficult bank. We got out there, the waves were pounding, and we were fishing for ragged tooth sharks. He threw a bait with a grapnel sinker. I thought I'd take a chance and throw a cone sinker just to get a bit of movement in the bait, because I wanted it to move, and there was quite a sort of not a strong current, but a slight current. So I thought, let me rather do it that way. Anyway, we threw in, and after about 10 minutes, we decided that the sea was far too strong, and it was far too difficult to stay out there. So we said we decided that the two of us would then would swim back to the beach, and we'd stand on the beach rather. And of course, because he had a grapnel sinker, he was able to hold. And because I was now further away from the water with the cone sinker, I was starting to wash. And anyway, I was washing and washing and washing. I was walking behind the sinker to stay straight with my line. And the next thing, Darian, my friend, got a bite, and he went tight, and he started fighting the fish, and he started coming down towards me, and then our lines were tangled, and it was a bit of a circus. So I just had to just reel in slowly while he fought the fish so that I didn't burn him off. And eventually we landed the fish. It was a raggy of, I think it was just over 110 kilos. And I went down to go and look at to help him with the fish, to unhook his fish. I got there and I found that my trace was right down this fish's throat, and his hook was hooked onto my sinker. So it was my fish. So I got the fish. He did all the work.
That's amazing.
I got the fish.
That is amazing. Oh my God. I'd love to share a story afterwards. It's similar, but Dad, didn't you once have a story about some dude who thought he fought and fought and fought, and then eventually he realized he was fighting his sinker or something?
Yeah, lots of those. So so that was the one story. Then
that's amazing. Oh my God.
Then another one, I made a note of. Oh yes, and probably one of the most stressful things that ever happened to me, fishing in our home waters, also in a national champs, and not a lot of fish around, and I hooked a good fish. I mean, when I say a good fish, a proper fish, and I fought it for 5.5 hours, and eventually I got it. It was a very steep beach, and it was up the beach, and it was down the beach, and it was up the beach, and it was down the beach. Seeing it, you could see it all the time, but not being able to gaff. The guys couldn't get hold of it because the swell was so big and the shore dump was so big. And eventually I lost the fish. It was a spotted eagle ray of probably 120 kilos. Beautiful fish. An absolute epic fish, yeah. One of those things you dream about. And anyway, I lost it. And I still have nightmares about that fish. What could I have done differently? I was so exhausted by the end of that, I must be honest, that I was cramping all over. And yeah, that was a difficult species, a difficult fish to catch. And yeah, I still have nightmares about it. Would have put me on top of the tournament, would have won the tournament, would have been fish of the tournament, it would have been everything, medals, the lot. So yeah, anyway, that was one of them. And then the other one, I think back to just give you some idea of what's necessary sometimes, to when you're fishing a comp, fishing up at a place called Cape Vidal. Very, very, very few fish around. Very clean water, very flat, which is very, really not the kind of water you want to fish with in Cape Vidal. And I hooked a honeycomb ray, which was going to be a winning fish. There was no doubt, because nothing was happening. So I fought it and I fought it, got it close, and I felt the line go around a rock. I thought, here we go. It was still probably 50 meters from the side. And I pulled this way, pulled that way, gave it free spool, didn't do anything, stayed on the rock. So eventually I just said, too bad. I took my clothes off, leapt over the side of off the rock into the water, swam up 50 meters, looked down. I could see the fish with my line around the rock, pushed my rod down to the tip until I could get it off the rock, got the fish off the rock, swam back, landed the fish. But that was my first South African colours right there. So yeah, it's the extras that you have to do. It's just, sometimes you have to do these things. So yeah, so those are the three memories that I have. One funny one and a couple of others. But yeah, sometimes you fail, sometimes you don't. It's fishing.
Yeah, Justin, what was that one? Go for it.
Oh, my one was so we grew up in that small village, Umtunzini, 1,000 people living there. We had an amazing estuary that ran down through the national park, and as kids, we maybe 10-year-olds, we used to go down there. We used to have mud wars. We were just completely feral. And the one day we had taken the cast net, we'd caught a bunch of prawns, and we were catching these spotted grunter, which are up to 2, 3, 4 kilos, good eating. And so one of my mates, I put a bait on my little bass rod and I threw it out. And then as we were having these mud wars, I looked back at the jetty and I saw my rod just go into the water. I was like, oh no, just swearing far too much for a 10-year-old at that point, just screaming, oh my God, ended up going and jumping off the jetty and swimming after my rod. I grabbed my rod and I was fighting this fish and I was just yelling profanities at it. Like families are walking past covering their children's ears. And in all my frantic fervor, I ended up snapping the line and I was distraught. Like, oh man, I lost this grunter. I didn't know it was a grunter at the time. But then anyway, put the rod back on the jetty and carried on with my mud war. And my mate went and baited it up again. He just casted this bait out and he left it there on the jet. No, sorry. It was a long time ago. You'll have to just cut that bit out. So I think my mate goes and he casts his line in, and he gets a pull. He fights this fish. He pulls it in. It turns out that the line that I'd snapped off, that was hanging out of the grunter's mouth, had tied a single knot around my mate's hook, and he managed to hook this and pull this grunter in, and we had grunter for dinner.
Nice.
The chances are, it's hard to remember the sequence of events, and it's hard to believe the story, but it sounds like my dad's story was equally crazy. So these things happen.
That's so good, guys.
Yeah,
that's so
crazy,
good. A little luck never hurts anybody.
Oh
ever.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
Let's run into this kind of last one here. Before we wrap, do you have any kind of final thoughts that you'd like to share with listeners who are interested in getting into surf fishing or into competitions?
Yeah. Again, I think that the competitions that we fish in South Africa and Namibia are so unique that they're really not repeated in other parts of the world, as far as I know. I know that in Europe and in America, not so much in America, South America, Brazil, they fish a competition circuit that they call it FIPS, which is also some kind of surf angling, but it's fished very similar to fishing for carp, with peg fishing. And it's not really the kind of fishing that we do. So I don't know that competition fishing is really relevant to this conversation from that point of view, because I don't think that the opportunities are out there for people to really get involved in other countries besides Namibia and South Africa. But I think that fishing in itself is always competitive. So if you go fishing with a mate, you stand next to him, and you're always going to brag about your fish being bigger than his fish, or you caught more fish than the other guy did. And so fishing in itself is competitive. And I think that you don't need to necessarily belong to a club or whatever, but what you should be doing is you should be trying to improve your abilities and not just be going to the beach to drink beer, because I think that's where, a lot of fishing it's got a bad reputation. So if you look at the jokes and you look at the cartoons that are out there, it's always about the guy sitting there drinking his beer and throwing his cans on the side of the beach and what have you. So I would like to see people trying to improve their skills more, number one. Number two, to have more respect for the fish themselves and to see more catch and release, because it is a finite part of things. We're very quick to blame the lack of fish on the trawlers and the longliners and the commercials, etc., etc. But we all play a part, and there are certain species that can only be caught from the beach. So some of your reef species, they don't even go out very far, and yet we seem to think that we can just take them forever and we can just keep eating them and then complain about everyone else. So I'm a great supporter of catch and release. I actually am an active tagger. I've tagged over 800 fish in my career. And then thirdly, I think be aware of the environment, littering. It drives me absolutely crazy, particularly in some of these countries. I mean, South Africa is terrible. I mean, some people they just drive you absolutely mad. You can't understand how a guy can go down to the beach and take a case of beers with him and leave all the bottles on the beach, but he can carry them to the beach, but he can't carry the empties back. It absolutely destroys me. Leaving nylon on the beach, which is getting tangled up with the birds and killing birds. Leaving hooks on the beach with bait on, which dogs come and pick up and they get them hooked in their throats. Kids stand on those hooks. They end up with even those sinkers, those same grapnel sinkers that we spoke about. Kids come and they stand on, they get a piece of wire through their foot. Guys, if there's anything that I would like to sort of put in, just respect the environment, respect the fish, and enjoy it. Go out and enjoy the environment, enjoy the whole experience, but don't mess it up for other people.
100% on that. Hey, leave the place as you found it, if not better. Because all too often you go to the spots, even the deep water spots, even here in Australia, sometimes you'll go and you'll see like bits of nylon lying around or like old bait and puddles, and it's just not a good look.
And it doesn't make sense. I truly don't understand people like that, because you're going out there to fish, which means you have some common sense, I would think, about the resources that you have around you and what you're fishing. You're protecting that area. You need to continue to make it good so we can continue to fish it. Why would you trash it? But people, for lack of better terms, some are just ignorant asshats that shouldn't be a part of that community, and unfortunately we have to deal with them. And I say that happily on a platform where there are people that listen. So if you're one of those people, stop, be a better person. Yeah, I'm gonna say that. But thank you, very well put. All right, last question for you, and Julian will go with you, and then Justin will finish with you on that one. What's next for you?
Sure. What's next for me? Well, this year I've got 2 tournaments. They'll probably be my last tournaments. I haven't really broadcasted out much, but yeah, there's been a few changes in that, particularly financially. I think it's not going to be worth my while to keep traveling back to South Africa to fish tournaments. So this year will probably be my last. It'll be my last tournament, national and international. And then I'm going to concentrate more on the trout side of things here in Switzerland. And hopefully the money that I'm saving by not going to South Africa, I can use to go and visit Justin.
You.
Australia, and can teach him how to catch some jewfish.
Please.
And also there's some destinations that I'd like to go to. I'd like to go to Cape Verde one day, and catch tuna off the side in Cape Verde Islands. So yeah, there's some ideas I've got, but yeah, that's it. I think pretty much.
Sounds wonderful.
So for me, I think this year I was doing some reflection cards at the end of the year. You get these reflection prompts, and one of the questions was, "What do you want to be a student of this year?" So at the start of 2024, it just came to me immediately. I didn't even have to think. I was like, "I want to be a student of fishing." So yeah, I've invested in kayaks, like stealth fishing kayaks for fishing offshore. So I've been doing quite a lot of that, catching a lot of Spanish mackerel or barracuda, as you might call them, and tuna. But at the same time, I'm loving my rock and surf right now. Like for the last couple of weeks, I've been focusing a lot more on that, especially since Gillian's come to visit Australia. And at the moment, I am 100% focusing on trying to catch jewfish. But yeah, I'm really enjoying the rock and surf. It's while kayak fishing is amazing and intense and extreme, and you catch big fish. It is all of those things. And the rock and surf, it's really relaxing as well, really grounding, and it's and there's so many species to catch. So yeah, I've got quite a lot of good fishing spots just down the road from me, like good deep water points as well. So yeah, I'm going to be getting amongst those for the rest of the year. I think try not to work too much, trying to get as much sneaky fishing in as possible.
Very nice. Well, Justin, thank you for setting this up. This was all you. You created this. So thank you so much for coming on the show and bringing your dad, putting all this together. And for both of you, thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for just taking the time out. I know, Justin, it's 10 o'clock at night there. Julian, it's probably coming up on afternoon, or it's probably 1 or 2 there now. But thank you both. I sincerely appreciate it. I've enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to seeing more from you in the future when messages and all that, and watching you continue on with the stuff. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Brian. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Brian. It's been fun.
Yeah.
It's been awesome. Yeah, really cool.
All right, gentlemen. We'll talk to you soon.
Good.
All right.
Cheers.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. That has been it's been a great trip. I mean, Australia, South Africa, a little bit of Switzerland. It's been kind of fun, actually. You can find this again. This website or this episode will be aired out on all podcast platforms. You can find it back on findingdemosurfishing.com, and you'll find all the information on there. I'll have all the links and tags back on through that. Thanks for sticking around. It's always good to have you here. Hopefully, you pick something up for knowledge, and it helps you out on your next fishing trip. Until then, take care of yourselves. You've been listening to Finding Demo Surf Fishing. I'm out.